Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Malika Young Park down inside my chest, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. I do have, as the title says, the Immortal Sacrifice game. This is one of the craziest sacrificial games I've ever seen in my life. It's like, if you like sacrifices, this is your game. Definitely. But as always, for my people in the Philippines, I will say, mabuhay, magandang umaga, kamusta na, masaya kong mukiti kang muli. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. As always, if there is anybody coming from Poland, I will say Cześć and Dziękuję for you. And anybody that is coming from Norway, I will say God Morgan and Tusen Tak. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So I was working on this name because it is a different name than normal. I believe it's Radosław Wojtaszek. Kind of close. I mean, it's, you know, it's not, Polish is not my native language. So, you know, the squigglies and just different stuff, like, you know, kind of the way you pronounce different stuff, you know, it's very fine. And I don't quite have that. So Radosław Wojtaszek. I think I said that at least somewhat right. And then there's, of course, there's Magnus Carlsen. This is a very interesting game. It is taken from round 4 of the FIDE World Cup, and it is game 1. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So D4, knight to F6, C4, E6, G3. So we do have the Catalan. And those of you that do watch my channel, just in a few seconds, you will see that this position looks very familiar. And, you know, I'm always talking to you guys about transpositions and, you know, kind of recognizing patterns and stuff like that. So, you know, those of you that watch my stuff, you know, like I said, in a couple of moves, you'll be like, yeah, this looks really familiar. Like, you know, so we do see D5, bishop to G2, bishop to E7, knight to F3, castles by white, castles by black. And you guys see it. You know, you have D4, C4, you know, D5, E6, knight coming here. You don't usually see the Catalans, but, you know, you guys can see, and you guys probably should be pretty familiar with the position to say, hey, man, I kind of know what's going on. It's not super the type of position where C5 would come. It might be slightly dubious. Usually C6 is a little bit better after you've kind of committed to this particular setup as black. But sometimes you can see C5. It is playable. And then we see A5. Bro, what? What is A5? Okay. Magnus Carlsen is a world champion. So, I mean, I'm not, like, questioning it too much. But, you know, A5, it struck me as kind of weird. You know, it's definitely one of those Magnus Carlsen type moves. You know, he's always into trying to, like, take somebody out of their prep as quickly as possible. And even though I do play the Catalan myself, I've never seen A5 come at this particular move. So he definitely would have surprised me. And I probably would have lost. You know, I don't know. I might could have hung in there. You never know. But we do see queen to C2. Very regular, very normal Catalan move. You're just anticipating that when the pawn takes back, you can take back with the queen. Your knight would probably come to B2. You can or not develop the bishop to somewhere. It's just kind of up to you. So we do see C6, like I said. Knight B comes to D2. You have B6, E4. It's the perfect time to throw E4 into the mix because, you know, this bishop is not developed. This knight is not developed. You know, you don't really have any pressure along this diagonal. So E4 is, you know, the perfect, like, you know, freeing move. So bishop comes to B7. Rook swings over to D1. Even though there are a crap load of pieces in a way, you know, like I say, it's always beneficial to put the rook opposite the queen or a king. Because you never know, you know, lines can start opening up. So knight comes to A6. We see E5. Knight back to D7. Pawn takes D5. Knight to B4. Throwing a nice little tempo on the queen. And queen comes to B1. Pawn takes D5. Knight down to F1. Bishop comes to A6. Knight comes to E3. So, you know, white is kind of like, you know, getting their pieces back into the situation. Rook comes over to C8. Makes a super lot of sense because this is an open file. So let's go ahead and do that. We have A3. So this is very, like, well-timed. A3 is just like, this knight was really annoying in white's position, so we need to kick it. So knight goes back to C6. B3, B5. We see H4. And this is a very common move and you know, d4 type openings. You know, it just kind of gives the loop for the king real quick. And it does kind of start a little bit of attack over here. When you do advance this pawn right here, and you do knock this knight away from f6, you know, the king side for black, or even for white, if you do the same thing as black, it can become very vulnerable. So you kind of see this bishop, you know, is kind of doing a little something. This bishop might can redirect and get over here. These knights are kind of poised a little bit. This queen can get, you know, kind of into the play. So, you know, it does take some care as black. So b4 comes. We got a4. Bishop comes to e2. And this move is actually a little bit annoying. Because it is attacking your knight, but it's also attacking your rook. So you're going to have to put your rook like on a really weird square. You're either going to have to back it back up to e1. But if you do that, of course, you're going to be dropping a pawn here after that. So you really only have rook to d2, which is super, super weird because you have this bishop that's like, hey, dude, why did you just get in front of me? Like, and then the knight is there too. So he's like, the bishop is really mad at both of these pieces. Like, you guys suck. So we got bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3. And it's not like the worst thing ever in the world, but this bishop is actually slightly so. Both bishops for white are kind of sad because this bishop doesn't really have a lot of scope like pointing in this direction because there's like a rock here. And then this bishop is like blocked by all its pieces. And, you know, it's not going to land anywhere over here. So, you know, you definitely kind of have some things to work out as white. You see f6. Bishop comes to g4 because, like, why not attack this pawn right here? You know, maybe just try to like activate the bishop just a little bit more. So that gets shut down by b5. So now the bishop is like super sad. You're like, dude, like, so there's all these pawns in the way. Like, you know, you kind of one of your hopes is to try to bring the bishop back over here. But I mean, you're going to be biting on a rock. So this is not the happiest bishop in the world. So if you want to go ahead and stop the video and see what Wojtaszek does in this position, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So I told you guys that this was like the Immortal sacrificial game. This was like the Immortal sacrifice game, right? So we actually start now with knight takes f5. If you guess knight takes f5, it is a legitimate move. It's actually one of the suggested moves, just kind of as a freeing sacrifice. Because like I said, this bishop was like super bad. It was kind of almost like a pawn. It didn't have the best scope anywhere. And so, you know, it's, you know, you're getting a little bit of, you know, compensation in return for this sacrifice, but it is actually a sound sacrifice, a sound sacrifice. So pawn takes f5, bishop takes f5, and you guys can see, you know, you have a little bit of an attack going. You know, you kind of have this knight pinned a little bit, so you definitely kind of are doing a little bit. You got a slight initiative going on. But then we actually see a bishop sacrifice of black. So they say, hey, you sacrifice, I sacrifice. This is just two of many sacrifices you are going to see. Pawn takes h4, queen takes h4. We see bishop to e6 with check, king to h8, and you really definitely do have to do some defense in this position, so queen comes to d3. You're prepared to swing this queen over to try to defend because this queen and this rook are like kind of like eyeing like a lot of squares, and this king, as you can tell, is a little bit open. The king is like, you know, I don't have any protection over here, like what's going on? And then, you know, all the white's pieces are kind of like hanging out over here, like, you know, we can't help you. So knight d takes on e5. So here's another sacrifice. Pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, queen takes d5. We see knight to f3 but check, so we have a queen sacrifice taking on f3. Rook takes f3, bishop takes c8, rook back to f8. So, I mean, like, you see how many sacrifices we did. Like, we literally both sides said, hey, you're not going to sacrifice more than me. Like, I'm going to sacrifice the same amount as you all the time. And that's literally what we see. So that's the craziness that's going on in this game. So white has 4 pieces and black has 2 pieces. They do have a rook and a queen, and they do have 1 extra pawn in this position. But it is actually fairly equal. And, you know, the crazy thing is it's actually slightly better for black in the position. And actually in this position, instead of rook back to f8, like h5 or even h6 was definitely very fine. Just advancing this past pawn and also just giving the king some lift. You know, this is actually very playable for black. It's actually like pretty good for black. But we did see rook back to f8. Bishop comes over to b7. We see queen to f6 with check. No, I'm sorry. Just queen to f6, not check. And this is actually a really funny position to be in as white because you have all of these pieces over here, but they are like configured so weird. Like I said, this bishop is still being blocked by this rook. Like, this is like siblings right here. She's like, hey, like, you know, this sucks. Like, why are you always in my way? And then you have this undefended rook over here in the corner. And black is definitely taking advantage of that. And really one of the only things to do is rook d to a2. You definitely don't want to do this because you're going to cry a river after queen to g6. Getting the king and getting this rook off the board. And you definitely don't want to be a whole piece down in this position at all. So... backing up, like I said, we did see rook d to a2, and like, I don't know about you guys, but this is not where you want your rooks at. You have two rooks, and you have them literally just like right behind one of your like far advanced pawns, and so it's not it's not ideal. You definitely want the rooks here or here or here or here or here, like anywhere else other than just being pretty much just like blocked in over here. So the queen comes back to f7. We see bishop back to g2 because, like, you know, black is just picking on everything that white has in their position that's a weakness. And now you've just swooped the pawn off the board after queen takes b3. We see bishop to e3, so we're kind of starting to liberate a little bit. And then we do see rook to d8. And as crazy as it sounds, the players agree to a draw in this position. I'm not sure who offered who the draw. I couldn't see. There wasn't any audio in the video that I was looking at. But, I mean, they basically shook hands and, you know, Magnus Carlsen stopped the clock. And I mean, at the end of the day, there's not, even though you do have a lot of pieces, there isn't a lot of progress that can really be made as white because, like, this pawn is never going anywhere. This pawn is not going anywhere without this pawn taking it. You do have these two pieces. And I mean, there really isn't, I mean, there is possibly you can kind of move the rook over somewhere, maybe give this pawn up. But I mean, the major issue with white's position is the fact that there is this advanced pawn. If there was not this passed pawn, then white is just completely horribly better than than black is. But because you have the threat of, like, you know, only a couple of moves and this pawn is going to be queening, and especially if you can eliminate this pawn, you just have like connected passed pawns over here, you know, you're probably going to have to give up a piece at some point, so you're going to be like 3 pieces against 2. So it was a too complicated of a position for Wojtaszek to play, so he went ahead and just agreed to a draw with Magnus. And I mean, you know, it's Magnus Carlsen, so people are just kind of like, hey man, you know, he's the best player in the world. Maybe he can convert this into a win. So let me just go ahead and get my draw while I got a chance. So you know, you can't blame him. But anyway, that was a really crazy game. There were so many sacrifices in the game. I couldn't believe, like, every time I went forward, it was a sacrifice. I was like, wow, that's crazy. So everybody that is coming from Norway, I would say tusen tak. For all of my people in the Philippines, maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking my video and aking my channel. Appreciate you guys very much. Paalam to you guys. Let me see. I think it's Jen Koyechi for anybody who is coming from Poland. I appreciate you guys very much, and I will see you next time.